Okay, Brian, I'm going to do the intro now in
okay,
local language. Dobar dan svima, dobrodošli na još jedan webinar koji organizuje predstavništvo. Moje ime je Dino Kurbilović, ja sam službenik za kampanje u predstavništvu i bit ću vaš današnji domaćin ovog webinara. Prije nego počnemo, zamolit ću vas samo da ostavite vaše mikrofone ugašene tokom čitave prezentacije kako bi dali dovoljno prostora našim predavačima da nesmetano mogu predavati svoje prezentacije. Također ću vas zamoliti ako imate pitanja da ih upišete u chat same aplikacije, dakle u dnu ekrana imate opciju chat pa budite slobodni da upišete vaša pitanja. Još jedna mala napomena prije samog početka i prezentiranja naših današnjih predavača. Ovaj se webinar će se snimati, fokus će biti svakako na samoj prezentaciji i na predavačima. Danas je sa nama Brian Faulkner, s kojim smo se družili prošle sedmice. On je stručnjak i savjetnik za hvatanje pasa u Velikoj Britaniji sa preko 15 godina radnog iskustva u tom polju, tokom kojih je sarađivao sa mnogim, pa skoro i svim velikim nevladnim organizacijama, od Dog Trusta, IFO-a do Mayhew-a i Wood Greena. Današnja tema o kojoj će Brian razgovarati se jednim dijelom naslanja na njegov prošlosedmični webinar, to će biti Dog Catching for Dummies. Nakon toga imat ćemo kratku sesiju 10 do 15 minuta pitanja i onda ćemo prijeći na drugi dio našeg webinara. Brian, that's it from me. I'm going to hand it over to you and you can start your presentation.
Okay, thanks very much, Dino. Good afternoon, everybody. This afternoon I'll be talking to you just very, very basic stuff on the catching and a bit of handling of dogs. I know probably most of you may be veterinarians or whatever and have never thought about catching a dog, but it's very useful to know if you're working on any animal control programs, what other members of the team are actually thinking about. Now, those of you that watched the webinar of last week, I was talking about the 5 freedoms. So bear in mind that throughout the process of catching dogs, that the 5 freedoms are still part of that process. Okay, I'll continue. That drawing there, that was, I found that on Google a few years ago now. And it was a school in the United States and the kids was given a project to draw what was their worst nightmare. And this young child drew a dog catcher, and it's pretty graphic, with a cap on with DC, dog catcher, and a catch pole in his hand. And I think it looks even like he's got a holster with a gun in it around his waist. So even from that age, a child, dog catchers have a very, very bad image problem. And this is reinforced through certain movies wherever there's dogs, especially cartoon type things, wherever there's dogs and there's dog catchers, the dog catchers are always the evil characters. That's classic one, that's Lady and the Tramp. And in the very, very first Lady and the Tramp movie, which was made in the 1950s, it was released in the 1950s, they didn't even show the dog catcher's face. That was about the most you could see was there. It was only in later movies of Lady and the Tramp where the dog, you could actually see the dog catcher, but they wanted to hide his face because they said that he wanted to be so evil looking. And again there, a dog catcher, they're always regarded as evil characters. So it's no wonder a small child, if she's got pets and dogs at home, then her worst nightmare is the dog catchers. Now, the dog catchers themselves, they don't do very much to improve their image. This is an American animal control officer. And if you can look, you can see him approaching those dogs. He's approaching them totally wrong. He's armed to the teeth, so to say, with a catch pole in one hand and a snare in his other hand, utility belt on with all sorts of things hanging off of it, fairly typical American animal control officer, unfortunately. Okay, not all of them. I've worked with some American animal control officers in the Caribbean, and a lot of them are okay, but you've got a lot of these gung-ho type characters out there, which only reinforces that image. And in Europe, especially in the Balkans, the dog catchers are looked down upon because it's not a very good job. It's one step below removing the garbage off the streets. In fact, I forget where it is. In one country that I visited to, I was working with a team of dog catchers, and I said, "Did you volunteer to do this?" They said, "No, I'm punished." I said, "Punished for what?" He said, "I wasn't doing my job properly. I was removing garbage, and they felt that I wasn't doing it properly. So they put me on the dog catching team." And that's how it is. And most of, certainly in the Balkans, many of them, the dog catching department is part of the hygiene department, street cleansing department. So it's this image that dogs have in people as well, that dogs themselves are regarded as garbage. And that's how it is. And it's ingrained in people. And that is something over the years that I have strongly tried to change people's attitudes with this sort of image. It's been a long struggle. Things have improved over the years, slowly but surely. But there's a long way to go yet. As you can see there, approaching the dog, you can actually look at the face of that dog, and that dog feels absolutely threatened. And yes, dogs get very, very stressed when they're being caught. So when I'm doing my courses, all I'm trying to do is minimize the stress as much as possible. Here, there's some pictures of dogs being badly picked up. The top left corner, that was in India. The top right corner was in India. The bottom left corner was in Romania. I forget the bottom right. I've got a feeling it was Bulgaria. I may be wrong. And the one in the middle of that was in Brazil. But wherever you go in the world, dogs can be abused through the process of being caught. So all the time, when people see this, it's reinforcing that image that dog catchers are evil people. So inhumane handling, it can happen at any point in the catching process, especially at point of capture, moving dogs on and off of vehicles, and also within the holding facility. Dogs can be abused. And the main causes are untrained staff, unsuitable equipment, and that picture there, it was in Russia actually, but I've seen them in some of the Balkan countries as well, the old-fashioned catching tongs. And yes, they are still about. I have seen them used. Vehicles can be totally unsuitable they're not fit for purpose. Quite often they're using old trucks, such as that one there, where it's very, very high off the ground. So it's difficult to get dogs on and off humanely when the wheelbase is fairly high off the ground. The holding facilities themselves are not very good. They're not designed well for moving dogs around. And there's no management accountability either. Now, I mentioned the OIE last week when I was talking about the 5 freedoms, and just to reinforce it, they issued guidelines as well to request all 182 member states to use only humane methods for stray dog control. And the guidelines are: competent authorities should collect dogs that are not under direct supervision and verify their ownership. Now, that's not to say the competent authority themselves physically goes out to catch dogs. It's delegated down onto a lower level. But they should have overall responsibility. Capture, transport, and holding the dog should be done humanely. The competent authority should develop and implement appropriate legislation and training to regulate these activities. Capture should be achieved with the minimum force required, and equipment should be used that support humane handling. I'll come back onto minimum force in a moment. But a lot of people, they don't quite understand what it actually means. The only thing that they actually specify is uncovered wire loops should not be used for capture. Now, the normal catch poles that you see, they're usually covered with a plastic sheath, so they're acceptable. But when bare wire is used, and I've seen it, it can cut into the dog's neck quite badly. So, minimum force, capture should be achieved with the minimum force required, and equipment should be used that support humane handling. Uncovered wire loops should not be used. And there's two examples of wire lassos. The one on the left is, I took that in Russia a few years ago now. I was working out there, and that weight in between that guy's fingers, that is a piece of lead. So when he throws that, it can bury itself into the neck and quite badly. I think I showed you that picture last week in the 5 Freedoms. And also the one on the right-hand side, that is a very, very thin wire lasso. Again, when the dog pulls, which undoubtedly they do, then that wire just tightens and cuts into their neck. So, minimum force, and that picture there basically is the ultimate in minimum force. If a dog can be picked up, then pick it up. Okay, not all dogs can be picked up, but certainly many puppies can, and I've seen puppies being caught on a catch pole. They just don't want to touch the dogs, but if a dog is friendly and it can be picked up, especially if it's small and friendly, then they can be picked up. And using minimum force reduces stress in both the animals and the catchers as well. And it also helps to minimize animal and human injuries. And here's a few examples. Top left, the guy there picking that dog up rather clumsily, but that was in Bulgaria a few years back now. And that was the first time he picked a dog. He was employed as a dog catcher, but out there they used primarily chemical capture. And he'd been working for the department for a number of years, and he'd never ever picked up a conscious animal. The only dogs that he'd picked up prior to that lesson was dogs that had been darted and they were anaesthetized. So he'd never picked up an animal that was moving around. And chemical capture is used to such an extent there that even the dogs in the shelters, if they wanted to move a dog from a kennel area into another area, they used to knock it out first beforehand. They didn't move anything that was moving around. The top right picture there, that was in Mexico. And again, that's luring a dog towards you with food and in the hope that he could sort of pick the dog up eventually. If I recall, he didn't. He had to use the pole on it. But he was trying to reduce the stress in that animal as much as possible. There's again that slip leashes over the other side there. Double-edged sword slip leashes. Many street dogs are not used to having anything wrapped around their neck, so they tend to resist it and they struggle. And then obviously in the bottom right, there is a cage trap or box trap. And again, the dog is caught in one of those. The traps are baited with food, and they can be transported back to the shelter in that trap, or they can be transferred into a cage. So very, very humane method. Here we have some intermediate methods, which is catch poles, some nets up the top, and the one on the right is a snare. I will be going in a little bit more detail with these pieces of equipment as I go through. So, well-socialized dogs can be caught on a simple slip leash, and the unsocialized or feral dogs, they may need more specialized equipment, such as traps and chemical capture. But between chemical capture and a slip leash, there is a whole range of equipment in between. So Slip leashes, as I've previously mentioned, dogs that are not used to having anything around their neck, they do resist a slip leash. They can settle down. It's how you handle them. One thing you mustn't do is, if a dog has got a slip leash or a pole around his neck, if the dog pulls away from you, don't pull away from the dog. Let go. If the dog pulls away, go with that dog's movement. Go in the same direction as the dog is going. In my workshops, I talk about Pavlov, where if force is applied in one direction, it's met with equal force in another direction. So if you pull against the dog will pull against you. So if the dog pulls, go with the dog. And that allows the dog time to calm down. There's a video clip on here later on that I took in Skopje, where the catcher, he did completely, very good, and he went with the dog. The dog was caught on a catch pole on this occasion. Friendly dogs suitable to be carried, they can be leashed, but not walked. If you can put a dog on a leash, pick the dog up. If it's a nice soft leash, you can use it as a temporary muzzle to wrap. You can do a muzzle wrap, right, by wrapping the leash around the dog's muzzle. Hand snares, useful for catching free running dogs. They're not suitable for long-term restraint, and unsocialized dogs can react violently. I took this little film clip a few years ago now when I was in Sarajevo on one of the mass neutering campaigns that we was working on. And I think this, I forgot the name, I'm sure Dino will remember, but these were the firemen that caught some dogs that was working on the project. So you see the guy on the left, he's luring the dog with food, which is a good technique to try and keep the dog occupied in one direction, whereas the guy with the snare is going to round the dog, as he was taught, to come up from behind the dog. He's approaching the dog from behind. Coming up from the rear is the only place that you can approach a dog without the dog actually seeing you. And this is quite interesting. The first time, this particular guy, the first time that he tried to catch a dog on a snare, he let go of the snare and the dog ran off with it. But he certainly learnt that lesson. He never did it again. And that was on the training process. Okay, dog's now caught, job done. And here again, this is in Sarajevo, it's the same guy. In this particular location, it was on like a farm area, and we wanted to catch the female, who was pretty feisty. She'd had a litter of puppies before, but even the owner, the guy standing in the middle of the blue t-shirt, he couldn't handle her either. So we wanted to bring her in for neutering, so we had to catch her. Now this guy's got a snare in the front there. I told him not to use a catch pole. I told him not to use it, but to catch the dog with a snare. And you'll see them do a snare to pole transfer. I don't know if you can hear my voice, but I've told him not to use the pole, but to use the snare. Things happen very, very quickly when you're catching dogs. Now, I've told them to bring a carry crate up to the dog. it's always advisable if you can bring a crate to the dog, so it saves moving the dog around too much. And as you can see, the owner is, even then, very nervous about touching his own dog. And again, job done. So, moving on to catch poles, they're not the best method for actually catching dogs, but as you could see in the previous film clip, they're really designed as a restraint tool. And you can't really restrain a dog on the snare because it's too flexible. Whereas you have more control of the dog using a catch pole, which is why I teach people, if a dog is caught on a snare, then to get the dog off the snare and onto a pole as quickly as possible. Now, catch poles in unskilled hands can be very, very dangerous. Be aware of not over tightening the loop. Check for the blue tongue. If the dog's tongue goes blue or starts to turn blue, then obviously you're cutting off that dog's air supply, and if you carry on continuing, the dog will die, okay? If they're not used properly, excuse me, they can be very, very dangerous. This clip here, I took a number of years ago in Skopje, and there's a guy there, he's got a bag of dog food there, he's using to lure the dog, and you find his colleague come around from between the cars to secure the dog on the snare. Watch how he does it. You'll see the dog back away, and rather than him resist the dog, he goes down the pole to calm the dog down. He moves with the dog. So look how he's doing it all right. He's positioned himself between the dog and the road, so to help prevent the dog actually darting out in the road, and it was a very busy road there. His colleague is going around the back with the pole. Slowly, slowly, slowly. Dog is looped. Now see how the dog is pulling, but he goes down the pole to calm the dog down. There, and it's a very, very good job that he did there. Okay, job done. So, I always put a health warning on catch poles. They can seriously damage a dog's health and are potentially lethal unless used correctly. And I wish that some of the manufacturers actually put a label in with their packaging when they market the catch poles, because they tend to be, if anyone that wants to start up their own animal control program, or they try and put in contract and they've never done it before, they seem to be the go-to method of trying to catch a dog. And as I've already pointed out, they are not the best method to catch a dog, but they are designed really as a restraint tool. Moving on to nets. If you look at that old picture on the right, that was taken in the United States in the 1940s. And nets was widely used even in the United States at that period of time. They're coming back in vogue, shall we say. They're used a lot now in Europe, certainly in Asia. I've used them a lot. So, and they are a very, very humane form of capture. We've got different types. Up at that one at the top left, that's called a drive net. That was actually me there a long time ago when I was in Kosovo. I've chopped my head off, which is good. So that's 20 odd years old now. It was around about 1999, 2000 when that was taken. And we was moving some dogs into a place of safety. The net on the right, we call them Ben-Hur nets, they're throw nets. And around the edge is like little tiny weights, so that when you cast the net, if you do it properly, the net drops down over a dog. I'm useless at those things. I cannot throw one of them for nothing. I'm hopeless throwing those things. Bottom left is a drop net. We use them a lot in Sarajevo, actually, to catch dogs. And the one on the right, it's a pole net, but it's a special type. It's marketed in the UK, but I've worked a lot in Asia, and these particular patterns are called the Bali net, the Balinese net. And those guys out there, I haven't got any film clips on here because they're quite long, but they can use that. They're very, very skilled in using those types of nets. So those of you who may recognize this character, this was in Sarajevo a number of years ago. Very quick film this, but how he's thrown the drop net. The lady that's there is a guardian, a feeder. Okay. Show that again. Very, very quick. Okay. This one here, this was in Kharkov in Ukraine. I had to think for a minute. And when you're working in a team, you try to avoid you try to keep the noise down. So I always say, and I teach what's called non-verbal communication, sign language, basically. So if you want to indicate something to another member of your team, rather than shout, then you sort of do gestures, hand signage, using your arms, hands, or whatever. And if you watch this film clip, he's indicating to his colleague that is out of camera shot at the moment, that this dog is pregnant. It's a special type of net. They're a quick release net. It's on a sliding handle, so you don't have to twist the net to secure the dog. You just slide the handle down and the net closes around the dog. This is where he's indicating that the female's pregnant. Again, job done. Just moving away now, I have done some training with them. These are implements to use to restrain dog. They're called Y poles. They're basically it's a long metal pole, and the end of it is like forms a Y. If you need to restrain a dog, particularly in the kennel, a lot of dogs that have been in the kennel area for a long time, they tend to have an adverse reaction to a catch pole. And the dog may need to be restrained for the vet to do vaccinations or whatever. But if they react badly to a catch pole, then this is an alternative method within the kennel area or a veterinary area to temporarily restrain a dog, so that while basically the dog is pinned around the neck, usually up against the wall, or in the bottom picture there, the dog is actually restrained in a net on the street. That was in India. And they've actually pinned the dog down with the Y pole as well, to prevent the dog trying to bite his way out the net, which can sometimes happen. So it's a backup, really. The dog has been caught previously in the net. and the white pole as a backup device to try and prevent the dog escaping while they're waiting for the truck to arrive. And unfortunately, quite often, where you catch a dog, you might leave a truck in one position and walk through back streets or whatever to try and catch a dog or some dogs, and the truck is quite a distance away by the time you've caught some dogs. So you have to try and stop the dog escaping somehow, which is why I always say, if you've got a cage, try and bring a cage with you, and then the dog can be restrained in the cage. Traps, again, I like trapping, very, very relaxing. We only use what's called live traps or box traps, not the leg hold traps. I've been asked, quite often still get asked questions about using leg hold traps. No, they shouldn't be. They cause huge injuries. I know they're still used in wildlife trapping, but I think they should basically be banned totally. So a trap, the dog trap is virtually the same as a cat trap, only bigger. It's a cage, it's a cage door, and use it quite often as a tripping mechanism in it, and it's baited with food. And you should always check traps fairly regularly whilst they're set in place. This was a film clip I took in Singapore. It's quite a way away. The tree in the foreground here, I'm actually behind that tree, and the trap is set further away. And on the right-hand side of the picture, there's a factory unit there, and there was a couple of dogs in there which they wanted to catch. They caught one of them. So, and it's a fairly slow process. That's the foreman of the trapping team. He's set it, he's walking away, well away from the trap. Singapore's an interesting place. I don't know if any of you's been there, but I've worked there fairly frequently. You're not allowed to throw any garbage, any litter, anywhere on the ground. And usually when you trap dogs, you pre-bait the area around the outside of the trap first. Wasn't allowed to do it there because they said that they get into trouble. And they were government, they work for the government, these guys. Said, oh no, we're getting into trouble. We can't throw anything on the ground. So we actually made like a gravy to encourage it. You can now see the two dogs come into the trap. One of the dogs we caught, the other one, they did catch the other one a couple of days later. Same method. You see me move in a moment. That's it, I'm moving now. So we positioned it a fair distance away, but we kept the trap in view all the time. Traps are highly valuable. People steal them for various reasons. But there he is, typical Asian dog, that one, very common. Very cat-like in their behaviour, those Asian dogs. They're good climbers, they do climb. Okay. This is a manual trap. This was a training exercise I did in Romania a few years ago. Those of you that work for Dogs Trusts that are sitting in, you'll see a very good friend of mine in this, Ensar, because Ensar joined me on this trip a few years ago. Was it really as long ago as 2001? No, surely not. No, 2013. I don't know. Didn't think it was that long ago. So this is a manual trap we set up. It was a bitterly cold day there, and you can see water on my lens. It'd been raining heavily. So we let this dog go. It was a training exercise. It was old abandoned buildings this dog was living, and he had previously been caught some months before and had been neutered. But we was training the guys up, and we used this location to work with some of the dogs there. And they'd never set up a manual trap before, so we set it up for them. As you can see, it's a fairly low process. The dog is interested, he's sniffing around. He's not sure what's going on because we're standing around as well. So he's sort of suspicious. Look at his body language, the dog, he's a little bit apprehensive. He's got that little low tail wagging there. So he is very, very apprehensive. Here comes Ensar. He's going to chuck some more food down to encourage him. So the door is an ordinary transport cage, and to the door is attached to a long cord. So as soon as the dog is inside, you just pull the cord tight and close the door. Bang. There you go. Okay? So you don't have to have a fancy trap. You can do it with an ordinary transport cage if you need to. And then we move on to chemical capture, which means the remote capture of animals by means of drugs. Many problems are recognised with the use of chemical capture, especially within the urban environment, because dogs don't drop immediately. It takes on average 20 minutes for a dog to drop, and in that time, if there's roads there, the dogs can run out into a road, get hit by a car or whatever. This method should never be considered first choice, but last resort. And guns are not really suitable because a dart gun, it can create more trauma. So we usually advise that blowpipes are far more suitable. Yes, you have to be more skilled, but there's less trauma when you use a blowpipe than if you're firing a dart out of a gun. So further things to consider is dog catching is not only about understanding types of equipment, but a knowledge of basic dog behavior. Reading dog body language and how to approach a dog, etc., is also required. I'm not going to talk about all that now. I'm hoping with Dino at some stage in the future, I will give a further presentation on body language and behavior, because that is a presentation in itself. A small story here. This a few years ago when I was working in Zagreb. I've been out there working for a couple of weeks with the catching team there, and it was a day before I left to return to the UK, and we was called to go to this little house. This lady that was in the top left hand there, she got bitten by a stray dog, and the dog was that German Shepherd that you see in the pictures. The other dog in the picture is her own dog. So as you can see by the pictures, we caught the dog. The guys did everything right, put the dog in the back of the vehicle. I flew back to the UK the following day, and after my return, I had a phone call from a colleague of mine in the UK, the organisation that sent me to Croatia, Zagreb, and she said to me, "Brian," she said, "the German Shepherd, did it lick you? Did it bite you? Did it?" I said, "No. What?" She said, "Well, the dog was found dead in the kennels." And in Croatia, it's law that if a dog dies in unusual circumstances, and they remove the head and the brain is tested for rabies. That dog tested positive for rabies, not the furious rabies, but dumb rabies. So the lesson to be learned here is if you are responsible for any of your catching teams or a catching team or whatever, just be aware that when you're picking up dogs, you don't know their history or where they've been, what they've done, what anything that they're incubating. They are unknown. So you have to be very, very careful when you're handling strange animals. So guidelines, any sort of a catching agency, guidelines should be adopted that follow IE standards. Appropriate equipment, vehicles and dog holding facilities should be available. Training should be provided for all staff employed in stray dog control, and standard operating procedures should be introduced and adhered to. Thank you for your attention. Stay safe. Thank you.
Brian, thank you. Thank you for this presentation. It was very interesting. We do have a few questions for you, so if you would be kind to answer them.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yeah, I can indeed. And I can see Annette is sitting down the bottom down there as well.
Yes, she's here with us. So one of the questions that we received is regarding the equipment. Where can we source the equipment that we have seen used in the videos?
Okay. If they take a note of my email address, which is there, then they can email me to that email address. I'm just starting a website, which is not, it's online, but I'm working, it's work in progress. So eventually there'll be links through my website, but I haven't done it yet at that stage. So basically my website is a blog of what I've done, but I'm still working on that. But if anyone wants where they can source equipment, if they make a note or take a screenshot of my email address, then they're welcome to do that and contact me directly.
Thank you. The second question that we received is, what other types of chemical capture are available, and would you suggest using those types instead of more invasive approaches towards dogs?
Yeah, chemical capture, I haven't mentioned it on this presentation. Chemical capture also covers tranquilizers. One that is commonly used in dog control. I'm not a big fan of it myself. I have tried it. It can work. It's called Sedilin. It's acetapromazine. Basically it's a horse tranquilizer. It is designed to keep horses calm if they're transporting them, whatever. It's in gel form, which is easier to mix in food rather than ACP, which is in tablet form. So I've had limited success with it. All it can provide is a small window when the dog goes a little bit sort of lethargic. It can give you a small window to catch the dogs by another method. But you have to be careful with ACP. Some types of dogs, boxer dogs in the UK, they're recognised. They can react to ACP quite badly. It affects their metabolism somehow, and it's notorious in boxers. So you have to be careful when you use it. And I've had limited success with it. But normally, its chemical capture is administered by a dart, and it's usually a telazole. Is one. The other one is Rompum. Is to it gives you, the dog drops after about 20 minutes, and it gives you a time to pick the dog up. You have to be careful when you're transporting the dog, because you've got to be careful the dog doesn't swallow his tongue or whatever as well. So chemical capture does have some risk attached to it. So you have to be careful.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Okay, those are the questions that we've had. Thank you again for being with us here today. Hopefully we'll have another opportunity to invite you to another webinar.
Yeah, I intend to put one up a little bit on some dog behavior and maybe aggression in dogs or something like that at a later date, Dino. So if you give me a little bit of notice, and I'll start prepping it up anyway. So okay.
Okay, Brian. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Thank you very much. Bye.